Stephen, and we've got our lovely hosts today. We've got Frankie and we've got Julia. And we have a very special guest joining us today on this edition of the Ed Podcast. So please will you give a round of applause for old Waconian and LGBTQ plus activist Eva Echo. And so what we'd like to do, Eva, if you could please tell us a bit about yourself and give a little bit of a self-introduction, and we'll get this interview started.
Yeah, sure. Well, my name's Eva Echo, my pronouns are she, they, and I feel old being back here, I've got to say. It's just like, it's really surreal. This is the first time I've been back since I left in like 1998, which is like dinosaur years for some of you. So I do a lot of things. So I'm an activist, I'm also a public speaker. Ignore the bag. I'm also Director of Innovation at Birmingham Pride, one of the directors at Trans in the City, which is the world's largest organisation for trans and non-binary people within business. I sit on the Crown Prosecution Service's Hate Crime Panel. I'm an ambassador for the charity Diversity Role Models and also for Queer Britain, which is the UK's first and only LGBTQ plus museum.
Fantastic. So I think we've got a number of questions. I'm going to pass you over to some of our students.
So we were just wondering like what your kind of aims are with all that you do and like what you're trying to achieve and sort of like why you think that speaking up about just sort of any issue, particularly what you do, is just so important.
I used to think my aim was, well, when I first came out as trans, I used to think my aim was to just be happy and then just go back to doing what I was doing. And I quickly found that that wasn't the case because, especially through the power of social media, I realized that there were so many people out there who are also struggling as well. So it can't just be about me, it's about other people as well. And then the more I realized it's about like so many, I realized that we've got to have a look at struggles through an intersectional lens. So it's not just like a queer identity, whether you're gay or trans or whatnot, but if you're a person of color, that affects you even more. Religion, all sorts. So it's when I kind of realized that when you're struggling, it's not just you. It's no one ever struggles in silo. You struggle and other people have similar struggles as well. And the more that we can help each other, the more we can work towards better outcomes. So for me, it used to just be happy. Now I guess it's pivoted to make as many people happy as possible, and that's like speaking up about trans rights, racial equality, poverty, things like that, anything. And I think we all have a privilege and we all have a voice, and I think I'm a firm believer that we all need to use that privilege because otherwise it's just completely wasted. And if we stay silent, what's the point?
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, that's amazing, and hearing it from someone who had to go from that is like, I mean, it's awesome. So is it hard for you to speak up about these topics, especially in our like current climate and social norms and whatnot?
I think I used to. Like when I first came out, I just didn't want anyone to know. Almost like I felt ashamed of it. Yeah. And I guess the more I felt comfortable with who I am, the more I was happy to tell people, and I didn't care who knew. And the more I became visible, especially on Instagram, the more I thought, well, why not? I've got a chance to use it. And I'm also a firm believer of if you shout loud, more people will hear about your struggles and what you need to say. But as long as you do it in a constructive way, it's like I've been to protests where people are shouting and shouting, but not really anything constructive. But we need to work together to create that change. So I'm all for shouting loud as long as we can get somewhere and we have some sort of plan.
Yeah. So do you have any advice for anyone who would want to do the same thing as you did and deal with different opinions from others?
Yeah, mainly on social media. Like I get hate daily on social media. People that I don't know, who some of them are in this country, some of them other parts of the world. And it's almost like they think just because I'm really visible that they have the right to tear into me and criticize me or give their opinion of me just because they don't believe in who I am. But I have to remember that that's not my problem, that's a them problem, because I'm living my life, I'm thriving, I'm happy, I'm married, my wife's here with me today, and yeah, I'm just getting on with life. And I think once you realise that there is a lot of hate out there, but within social media as well, there's a community, and that's where I found like a close family when I was coming out that you can really latch onto. So yeah, I would say hold on to those people that are your chosen family, and just don't listen to all the haters, because no matter what you do in life, there will always be someone that hates what you're doing, hates who you are, and you can't change that. And let's face it, they're just miserable people anyway, so they can just go off and be miserable in a corner somewhere.
I mean, yeah, you being you is the most important. Nobody matters, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm curious from a kind of educational perspective, and you know, as a school, we're kind of always trying to evolve, to be better, to kind of meet the needs of students in a kind of changing world. How important do you think it is that schools educate pupils and support inclusivity within the community, or do you have any kind of thoughts on what schools should be doing to promote greater equality, understanding, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, as an activist, I would definitely say don't listen to certain bodies who have thrown out guidance, especially about trans students, because at the end of the day, like, I knew I was trans from about 4 or 5 years old. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I didn't need, you know, any sort of trend to affect me or anything like that. I just knew. And growing up through school, I didn't see a version of myself thriving, being happy, or being successful. So I guess representation is absolutely key. I also grew up, like when I was at school, Section 28 was in force. Section 28 was a piece of government legislation primarily targeting local authorities, and that basically prohibited the promotion of anything about homosexuality. Despite it being in force in England for about 15 years, there was 0 sentences in connection to that. But what it actually did was stop anyone talking about LGBTQ plus issues. Schools misinterpreted the legislation, and they thought, well, we can't teach anything about it. So growing up, I only saw like families that consisted of a mother and a father, relationships where it was very, very binary. And inside, I knew that that's not me. And because you're essentially going against like society, and you're not learning about more, it makes you feel so much more withdrawn and feel isolated. So I think for schools, it's vital to show pupils just how diverse the world actually is. But it's better to learn about it in a safe environment like this than it is on, I don't know, when you're out in the real world and social media where there's a lot of hate and things like that. So yeah, just explore who you are in a very safe, supported way.
And I suppose that comes through the kind of staff that work in the school, that comes through the books that we read in our library, the texts that we teach in our lessons, but across kind of all subjects too.
Yeah.
You know, even if that is, you know, something along the lines of in a science class looking at, you know, amazing people who did not fit that kind of like heteronormative kind of mold.
I think so, yeah. We actually watched a series last night called Queer World, I think. Like Queer. It was basically about how in the animal kingdom, queer relationships have always existed. There was like 2 male penguins that adopted eggs and things like that, and it's learning that this stuff actually happens, rather than try and bottle people to be, you know, either male or female and have to stick to rigid societal constructs. It's a case of understanding that there is so much diversity out there, and I think from a teaching staff point of view, yeah, teaching staff that are open-minded and understand the need to be able to talk about these things openly, rather than try and shut down any conversation where it's something that they don't understand. But just because they don't understand it doesn't mean it's not happening out there in the real world.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, the sort of like the next question kind of adds on to this. What should schools be doing to like support pupils who are part of the LGBTQ or trans community?
That's a great question. Supporting them and letting them kind of talk about who they are is really important. I didn't have the language to use when I was a kid. I just knew I was different, and for ages I used to go around thinking in my head, why am I so different? Why do I feel so different? But now there is the terminology out there, and I guess for schools to be able to understand the terminology as well, because you can't support someone if you don't understand it yourself. So things like, you know, the LGBTQ plus acronym, what does that mean? understanding things like Section 28, 1969 Stonewall Uprising, the history of like the whole queer community, because belonging is a huge part of who we are. So even though I came out like 7 years ago now, it still felt like there was a section of my life missing, because of Section 28 and that having a devastating effect, there was no published history of who we are, where we've come from, the things that we've achieved. So it's like now we're trying to go back and like fill in those gaps and do all the research. So if we can ensure that everybody's history is included, I think going forward, everyone's going to have a better chance at life.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's really great.
I
Thank
heard
you.
you talk about being in school when Section 28 was still in order. And, you know, as someone who learned about that in history, I never really related to it actually happening in real life, you know. I assume you weren't out yet, but did you feel like directly targeted by it? Like you couldn't talk to your teachers or?
Yeah, I didn't really know the terminology. So at the time, I didn't know if that was me. But, I mean, I hope it doesn't happen now. But like in the playground, when like people bully you or shout at you and call you names, back then, like if someone called you queer or gay, that was like a put down, that was like a slur. And hearing that would make me think, oh, I don't want to be that. So that kind of created a lot of internalized homophobia and transphobia within myself that I've had to unpack over the years and realize it's not that negative, you know, slur that I used to be called. I was called that because people didn't understand it, and people didn't understand it because of the lack of education around it. That's really glad to know that, like, you're taught that.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
nice.
Also the Stonewall riots, like we've recently done that as well.
Fab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Who are your role models? So you talked about kind of like representation, and who are people that, you know, young people should be aware of?
My wife is a role model because she's been my rock through the entire like coming out process. When I came out, I thought she was going to leave me, but she was really supportive, really understanding. So yeah, she's like a role model for me to understand, like I need to be understanding to others as well. I used to have celebrity role models, and then I met a bunch of them and I thought, a bit problematic.
I mean, they say don't meet your heroes, so.
So yeah, I guess when we're in a certain point in our lives, we put like celebrities, well-known people on a pedestal because we only see one facet of their identity and how they behave. So I guess for me, learning that heroes and role models are all around us constantly and not to just idolize certain people in the spotlight. So for me now, it's gone from people with blue ticks and whatever, like how many thousands of followers on social media, to just people who've got something to say. Like some of my followers on Instagram, they've only got like really small following, but some of the stuff that they're posting is so genuine and heartfelt, and they have a really important message. And like for me, that's really inspiring to see that despite, you know, what's going on and the struggle to be as popular as you can, they're still out there doing their thing.
Yeah. I mean, do you think there's been a positive trajectory in perceptions and views on LGBTQ, like throughout?
I think we're going backwards at the moment.
Yeah.
It started with the trans community, but then that's had a knock-on effect with the rest of the queer community as well. But also with things like women's rights, they're starting to roll back as well. Over in the US, we had the repeal of Roe v. Wade, which was about abortion access. And I think history has taught us that it always starts with one small group, often the most marginalized, and they're the ones attacked first. And it's almost like, how can we do more? What can we get away with? And it's all about establishing control over certain groups and to kind of maintain the societal norm. So I think because of things like that, and because of politics as well, like politically, a lot of countries are moving more to the right now. And we only have to look at what's happening here in the UK or over in the US to see how things have shifted dramatically. And with that shift, it means that certain rights are at serious risk. And a lot of people don't seem to realise that, yeah, you know, it is just the trans community now, but when we look at things like bodily autonomy, then it will affect so many more people as well. Even, you know, we're not out of the woods yet when it comes to the back end of Section 28. A lot of queer people, like a lot of gays, lesbians and bisexuals are still stigmatised. You know, things like healthcare, work as well, and sometimes even in education. So yeah, that's not completely over, and there's still a lot of work to do, but even then, as things are starting to slip back, so we need to all make a concerted effort to stand against that.
Yeah. How did you sort of like become involved in activism? Like, was it something you sort of always felt like, you know, you wanted to speak out, or was it kind of a more recent thing?
I just got into it by accident, to be fair. I think, like, no one starts out saying, when I grow up, I want to be an activist, because careers day here, that wasn't a thing. For me, it was like everything to do with art and design, and the random one, which is like air traffic control. So, yeah, I think for me, I fell into that, and I thought, well, now that I'm here, I can make a change here and there. Why not do something more, try and inspire other people to do it as well? But yeah, no one really thinks I'll be an activist. I guess, in a way, we are all activists. Like, whether it's politically, or even things like you deciding whether you go to Costa or Starbucks or another, you're making a physical choice as to who you're giving your money or your support to. So in a way, we all have that power to really make decisions and make an impact. And I guess for me, I just took it to another level and did it with other things like, you know, taking NHS England to the courts and stuff like that. So I think we all have the power to do it. It's just whether we can.
Yeah. And sort of like, what advice would you have for young people who are like interested in fighting for a cause?
Make sure you have a really good support network, because it's tiring. People don't fully understand what you do. Often you're kind of diminished as this really militant or eccentric sort of person. But at the end of the day, we just believe in something. We believe in social justice. So just keep going. You know, don't listen to the haters. Try not to question why you're doing it. You know, you want to do it because you're doing it for the right reasons, and just follow your heart on that. But having a good support network really helps as well, because things will get really nasty. Things will get you down, and having a good support network will be like that saving grace, because you can just switch off from it really and just spend time with people that you love.
I think right now, with you said like a support network and stuff, mental health plays a huge part in that. So what do you think about mental health in the LGBTQ community?
They go hand in hand at the end of the day. So for me, being trans isn't the thing that caused a decline in my mental health. It was society not accepting me. It was the lack of healthcare support, the lack of, well, like support when I was in working full time for a company, the lack of, like, I don't know, like the lack of acceptance and the discrimination. Like, just when you're out and about, you're constantly having to watch over your shoulder. Is anyone judging you? Is anyone saying anything? So that really wears you down, because your entire existence is almost like you're crawling around hoping nobody sees you, and you become almost less than you truly should be. So your mental health declines, and I guess for me, when I was at school, there wasn't any talk about mental health. My mental health declined whilst I was here at school many years ago, and because there was no talk of it, it's almost like it doesn't exist. But inside, I was spiraling out of control. I didn't know who to ask for help, and even if I did ask for help, would they believe me? So, yeah, opening up that conversation is so necessary these days.
So I'm curious, you had mentioned a little bit about your fight with the NHS. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so for trans people here in England and Wales at the moment, there are only 7 clinics that you can go to, and whenever you ask your GP to refer you to any specialist service, so for example, if you've got a problem with your knee or your back, then you're referred to a specialist service, which is 9 times out of 10 a hospital. And you're supposed to have your first appointment within 18 weeks. But for trans people, your first appointment is openly measured in years. So I came out 7 years ago, and I'm still waiting for my first appointment. So that wait is having a severe impact on mental health, as we've just discussed. And the suicide rate is like almost like 50%, which is horrendous, because people can't bear waiting. And like, even if I get my first appointment, I'll probably have to have a number of appointments, and then I go onto another waiting list, I'll have a number of appointments, I go into another waiting list. So by the time under the NHS I receive treatment, it's probably about 12 years from when I was first referred, and we have no mental health support during
In
that
that
time.
time.
So we're kind of left to fend for ourselves. So myself and 3 other people, we basically took action against NHS England. So they're the people who commission all the services and make the decisions, essentially. And we cited that it was essentially unlawful to leave people waiting for such a long time without any support. So there's a horrendous amount. So we ended up spending about 2.5 years. We went all the way to the High Court. Unfortunately, we weren't entirely successful. But one of the important judgments we did secure was that under 18s are covered under the Equality Act against discrimination, which means in places like schools, when out and about, even in medical settings, they can't be discriminated just because they're trans. So that was a really important victory for us.
Well, thanks for sharing. I think we've got maybe a few more questions.
I mean, I had a question.
Go on then.
So, when I know you are an activist for trans rights, is there anything else that you kind of spread awareness about, or is that your main thing? How did you decide to? You know,
Trans rights, because being trans is like it directly affects me. Violence against women and girls is something else I'm passionate about, because I work with a number of police forces as well to kind of strategize and help develop campaigns. It is pretty much an epidemic right now, because when we look at things like rape convictions and domestic abuse convictions, it's minuscule, and we need to do a lot more about that. I guess people would describe me as a raging feminist anyway, so why not lean into that and make the most of it? But yeah, there's a lot of imbalance at the moment, and we still, you know, just looking at things like the gender pay gap within employment is such a massive thing. It was identified years ago, and we're still not really doing anything to close it. So there's a lot of issues to do with that. But going back to intersectionality, like, those issues affect me as well. So the more that we can work together, and if I do more of what I do in my specialist area and help others as well, the more we can just move forward and hopefully get to that nice ending where everything just works.
yeah, everything just, you know, fits. Yeah.
Hopefully. It'll
Hopefully.
happen. I know it will.
Yeah, sort of like, what day-to-day things do you think people can do, like, if they're not as comfortable, like, speaking in front of a massive crowd, what do you think they could do on a day-to-day basis just to help support anyone of, like, any race or gender?
If you've got social media, don't be afraid to use it. Like, the people that follow me are very different to the people that follow any one of you as individuals. So if I post something, it only goes to certain people. If you share something, it will go to your groups and your circles as well. And by doing that, you're helping the right information spread to more and more people. So sometimes you don't even have to say anything. You could, you know, it takes like less than 2 seconds to share something on Instagram as a story, for example. But if you see something, you think, yeah, I agree with that, and I think more people need to know about this, don't be afraid to share it, because you don't know whose life you could be saving, even if it's just one person that you'll never know about. That's one more person.
Do you think there's anything that I know young people tend to be marginalized when it comes to speaking up about things. Do you have any advice for what a young person can do other than posting on just like a repost?
Yeah, don't give up, I would say. Things like I used to come out with as a kid, people like my parents would say, you know, you'll grow out of that, you won't believe that when you're an adult, but I still do. So I'd say persevere, don't let an adult tell you you shouldn't be thinking or having a certain belief. If you're passionate about something and it's a cause that you truly believe in, then why not? Especially if it's doing good for so many others as well. But just hang in there, most importantly.
Yeah.
I think we're just about kind of running out of time, but if we have kind of a final question, and what advice would you have for anyone who wants to come out to their family, if they want to open up about who they really are?
That's a good last question. Be your own kind of beautiful. I think even before I came out, even when I was at school, I used to struggle with how to fit in. I used to think I have to behave one way or act like another way. I used to think I had to be really good at sport, even though I was really bad at sport. So For me, it was finding my identity and knowing how I fit in with the world and the people around me. And I guess once I realised that it does not matter, like what I do is still me and it's my version of beauty. So even if no one else understands it, it's still good enough for me. And I think remembering that helps you to just find your path in life and know that you can just keep going down that path. Even if you're the only one, that's fine. And if you're the only one, then it's not going to be so busy and you've got the whole path to yourself. So it's all good.
I think that's really a beautiful, positive message to end on. Sadly, I think that's all we've got time for today. I think we could probably talk for another half an hour, really, at least. But a big thank you to you, Eva, for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really great.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Really nice to meet you.
And
Yeah.
you. Thank you.